to Blacklight Mass Incarceration Show. I am your host, Ciara Cobb. Blacklight Mass Incarceration Show is a space that is used to uplift the unheard voices of the criminal and social justice issues that many face today. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Blacklight. We are back for another episode. Today we have a guest who is incarcerated out of Washington State. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about him. His name is Aaron Edward Olston. He is a multimedia journalist and host of the Abolition Christian podcast, which I think you can find that on any major streaming platform. And also he's on Twitter as well. Incarcerated since the age of 19, Aaron is serving a life sentence in Washington State. So today you will hear from Aaron himself and also his wife, just a little bit about, what it's like to be married to somebody incarcerated, especially with somebody with a life sentence. And we will be speaking to them. All right, Aaron, I've kind of already done an introduction of what you sent me. So if you just want to, start off. So we'll start off with you and then we'll talk to Tracy. But if you want to kind of start off about, your story, just a little bit of background about, your growing up and then incarceration.
Yeah, sure. My name is Aaron Edward Olston. I'm 37 years old. Many people know me today as a multimedia journalist and host of the Abolition Christian podcast. I've been incarcerated since I was 19, and I'm currently serving a life sentence in Washington State. A little bit about my childhood. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington. A lot of people, when you hear about Tacoma or Washington State, first, if you don't say Tacoma, they think you're talking about D.C. And then when you tell them where it's at, they're like, "Oh, is that Canada?" No, it's the U.S. And where I grew up, it's an interesting spot. It's still an inner city, like a lot of the same things a lot of our cities are. I grew up in the 80s and 90s between the Hilltop, which is at that time was a modern gangland, and then Salishan was right next to it, and that was basically a government-designated refugee settlement, which turned into a slum.
Wow.
I was raised by my mom. She was a single parent of four, and she struggled with mental illness. I lost her while I was incarcerated in 2013 to suicide. It was a self-inflicted gunshot. It's really a reflection of it's a reflection of our childhood.
Right.
It's strange, gang violence kind of manifests in different ways. And with that, gun violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in inner cities, guns are prevalent. And so you find yourself in positions where your life is at risk, or people taking their lives, or people succumb to the pressures and mental struggles and take their own life with a gun. So that manifested in her life in 2013, which was a huge shock. And then, she was working when we were growing up. She was doing the best she could. And, me and my brothers, we were really raised by the streets. I was a drug addict from the age of 12, and then I got put on as a gang member at age 13. I experienced my first homelessness when I was 15, and that was after I was expelled for the final time from school. And that was kind of like my dad tried to start coming back into my life a little bit, and I wasn't really interested. And really, I didn't really have a spot to stay because the requirement was go to school. And I didn't really feel, at home or welcome at school. I was always getting expelled for either drugs or fighting, or it just didn't seem like it was something that was worth my time, which I regret now, of course.
Right.
So,
but when you're
kind of a snapshot.
When you're young, you don't think about stuff like that. And so it sounds like kind of that's what molded you, was just the childhood. And, we kind of, when we grow up, we go off of what we see and the examples that we see. So when you don't have good examples, then it's hard to really be an example, a good example, when you don't have good examples around you, because we mimic what we see, especially growing up as children. we tend to take in what we see. If we see good things, then, a lot of times we spew good things. But when we see bad things, then that kind of molds us to do things that, we probably wouldn't have done if it would have been something different.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so it's interesting, when you mentioned, the things that we see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, when I was in middle school, it was like the last kind of the good years, and that was really where, life there was a fork in the road, and it was a kind of a conflict of two things. There was some good things, right? There was a few good teachers, there was a few good friends, and then you had this conflict kind of moving into the schools now from the street life. And then by the time you're in high school, it's a wrap, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I remember in middle school, I had this homegirl. Her name was Tempest. And we got prettiest eyes together. I got two different colored eyes, and she had just these beautiful hazel eyes. And this tall, light-skinned girl. And the very next year after we got prettiest eyes, I had found out that she was forced onto the track. What a lot of people, they don't know what that is. It's basically being forced into sex work or prostitution. And the next time I ran into her was in this drug rehab, this outpatient, that I had ended up dropping out of it. That was one of the requirements of going back to school. And then I was like, what happened to you? She looked sickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that she got hooked, she was forced into prostitution. She had got hooked on drugs, and then she contracted HIV. And it was just like it's crazy. You start realizing, wow, this is my life. Like nobody's making it out of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's becoming a doctor. Nobody's like sailing off into the sunset. There's no positive stories. And then losing, that very same year, losing my first homeboy Marcus to gang violence. He was stabbed. He died just a block away from my house. And yeah, you start realizing, like, man, this is my life. My life is about, it's about survival. And then you start looking to older men, right? And you think, oh, is this a man? In this older generation, that pimps, dealers, these are people that we call in the streets your big homies, and it's drugs, it's money that holds the highest value. And you learn pretty quickly kind of the order of operations. And sadly, women meant very little other than sexual gratification, or they were like decoys, when you went to go hit licks, or they were pawns to lure opposing gangs into compromising positions. And it's what I would come to find out later was really a rape culture that I had grown up into, where there's block parties, and those block parties turn into house parties, and in those house parties, there's back rooms where crazy things go down, right?
Right.
And this is normalized. This is normalized. So, yeah, my childhood is one of trauma, but it's common for many inner city youths. Growing up fatherless, and surviving the things that we had to, attempts against our life. It's common to be jumped, kicked, stomped, stabbed, mauled by dogs, homeless, poverty, and then you're experiencing, before your brain fully develops, suicide and overdose at a high level. Then it just becomes, a cycle of trying to survive.
Yeah, it's like your environment is molding you, not necessarily, the things in the environment is starting to mold you. And I think that's what's kind of lost in the court system, is understanding that it's an environmental thing, that a lot of people don't just wake up and say, hey, let me go commit a crime. It's the things that they've been molded into in their environment. And so, that's why yes, you're conditioned to do that. And so that's why it's important to ensure that, we have thriving communities. And I think that they always tend to overlook that, that putting resources into communities is really important, but that's not something they want to understand and see. So, yeah, I know that you run the Abolition Christian podcast, so I kind of want to talk about that. Tell me, how has your faith in God helped you navigate life while incarcerated?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So it's been everything, right? So growing up, I grew up Roman Catholic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no disrespect to Roman Catholics, but for me, it was just like religion. You went a few times, you touched yourself with the holy water. My grandfather later in life, he became a priest. That's a whole different story, but it was really a foundation, if anything. And then I think it was right around the time where things started getting, unraveling in my life. As a teenager, my dad had given his life to Christ, and that's when he was trying to kind of push into my life a little bit, like, hey, I want to be president. And I'm like, nah. But then there was one time where he was like, hey, come to church with me. And I said, no, I'm all right. He was like, well, they're going to have dinner. And I think there's going to be some girls your age, right? I was like, all right, I'm there. So I'm there. And there was this South African evangelist. He was preaching that night, and there was nothing special about his story. But I had prayed in the back seat, and I didn't know God. I never experienced God. I never experienced the Holy Spirit. I didn't know anything really about that. It was just really pie in the sky, right? Or just kind of religion, going through the motions. So I'm in the back seat, and I just asked, I just say, God, okay, if you're real, like, show up. And I remember sitting in the audience, and the South African evangelist got to this part of this testimony where he said, I was traveling and I didn't take no money with me. I just depended on whatever donations came my way. And he said, I'm standing in line for my train ticket to go to the next destination, and I don't have any money, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I prayed, and God said, stay in line. And he said, this person up. There's one more person in front of him. He said, I don't have any money, God said, stay in line. And the person turned around and handed them enough money for his train ticket and said, this is from God. God bless you. And kept it pushing. And it was at that moment. I mean, the story's kind of corny, right? But it's something in that moment, right? God met me, and I didn't give my life to Him at that moment, but I never doubted His existence. I said, okay, you're real, right? This whole surrender thing and giving my life to Christ, I'm not there yet, but I know you're real, right?
Right.
So that was the seed or the water, right? And so my life just continued to unravel after that. But deep down inside, there was this call, right? There was this call. I knew God existed, and committing the crimes that I committed or running the streets, I was like terrified. I was scared. And there was this conviction there that I knew I was made for something better. Mm-hmm. God didn't call me to be a destroyer, to be someone that harms or preys upon the weak. God called me to be a protector. So I found very quickly, right before my incarceration, that I really hated myself. I hated who I had become because it was the complete opposite of who God called me to be. And that realization came post-incarceration. So me, like many, had a jailhouse experience. But unlike some, that jailhouse experience continued over the course of these 18 years of my incarceration. It was shortly into my incarceration that God got a hold of me. I'm sitting in this multi-purpose room. There's people in there for all different reasons. God got a hold of me. These preachers were up front, and they were talking about getting rich in '06 and then maybe enjoying heaven in '07. I'm like, what are they talking about? I found out later, these are some Pentecostal preachers, right? So then they played this corny little boombox. They put this corny boombox on, and I don't remember the words. All I remember is just putting my face in my hands and just giving up and saying, God, take over, have your way. And since then, it's just been a tremendous journey. So salvation happened, and then for the next 2 years, I spent 4 years, right, in the county jail, which was like hell, right? Mm-hmm. Never saw a blade of grass, the sun, anything like that, right? Just total isolation. But 2 years into that 4-year stay, I had been bombarding God. Okay, so now what? What have you created me to be? Who am I? And it was actually through the laying on of hands and a word of prophecy at a moment where I was asking God, right? Who has He called me to be? And He had been like depositing in my spirit, a shepherd. I've called you to be a pastor. And I'm like, is that you? I mean, is that your voice? Am I crazy? Is this just years in jail getting to me? Right. And I always tell people, Christians filled with the Holy Spirit, right? Yeah. Hey, they're either it's either real or they're crazy. There's no in between, right?
Right.
So God is speaking, right? And then so this man and wife team, this husband and wife team came in, and we're in contact with them still today. John and Edie Bushnell, wonderful people. And I get in line. She prophesies, right? He's praying for people. She prophesies. I'm the next one in line, and I ask God, right? If you've called me to be a shepherd, then speak through your servant and confirm that. I'm the next one up. Do you need prayer? Yep, I need prayer. And then she lays her hands on my shoulder. She says, take off your shoes, for this is holy ground. I see a staff in your hand. God has called you to be a shepherd, a pastor. Boom, right there. She had no idea what I was praying in my mind. Right. And at a moment where I was asking God to confirm, she confirmed. And so 16 years after that, right, that brings us to 18 years later. What God has done in me is He's moved in my life and built me into a shepherd, into a pastor. And he's used me to, I've participated in mental health programs here, especially after losing my mom, to that situation.
Right.
So pilot programs, mentoring, finding service dogs, preaching at church, hundreds have come to Christ, right? And it's been spectacular. Prison has been hell in many ways. And there's been these glimpses of heaven, right? Where God has just intervened in my life and then used me to help others. And I mean, look around. It's just filled with people who need God. So it's not hard to be used by God in prison.
No, and I mean, we got to think about it. When you look at the Bible, there were a lot in the Bible that were in prison. I mean, Paul was one, Daniel was one, you know what I'm saying? Jesus was one. So a lot of them did their work while they were in prison. Like, look at Paul, who, was able, first he was a sinner and wanted to kill all the Christians, and then Jesus spoke to him, and then he brought him, and then he was in prison, and so he was sending his people. He was talking to the Corinthian church from prison, you know what I mean? So he uses people no matter where you are, and sometimes it's in the depths and the pits of your worst that he uses you to bring your best and to bring other people to him. You know what I mean? So sometimes, even though we look like prison is the worst of the worst and why this happened to me, a lot of times he puts you in those situations to bring you to him to do his work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So Ciara, and that's really what it comes down to, right? So as we fight in this abolition movement to change the system, to restructure it, right, into a more just system and sentencing process, it's wild how God, in spite of an unjust system, will move in the lives of his children, right? I was laying on my bed this morning. I was just praising God, thanking him. Thank you for bringing me to prison and saving my life, even though I do not like the way this is set up. It is not conducive for many people to transform all those, in spite of their circumstances, who would look to you and cry out to you. You will meet them, right? You'll meet them in the darkness, and you'll transform us. I mean, he's faithful to do that. It's never an excuse of an unjust system, right? But that's kind of a conundrum. We fight for a more just system, but God is able. God is able in spite of it.
Yeah, he's able and willing. So tell us, can you share a particular scripture or practice that provides you strength and hope during your difficult times?
Yeah, 100%. It's very, very, very common.
You have 1 minute left.
Popular scripture. I'll end on this, and then I'll call back Jeremiah 29:11. It is the very first scripture he gave me in my walk. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of good and not evil, give you a future and a hope. And then he goes on in those next few verses, and he says, when you call on me, right, when you come to me and pray with me, when you come to me with all of your heart, and that's God's requirement. He just requires one thing, everything. If you come to him with everything, he will transform and change your life. And he'll take you with a life sentence. You've done messed up your life, shamed your life, hurt people. He'll take you, transform you, and then use you as a wrecking ball to Satan's kingdom, and use you as a great force in the kingdom of God. And that's really my inspiration all the way throughout this incarceration.
That's absolutely right. All right, we'll be waiting for you to call back.
Thank you. We're all back.
All righty. Did you want to finish off with the last question, or are you ready for the next one?
Yeah, I can talk for hours. So go ahead and get to the next one.
All right.
You want me to keep talking? I can just talk.
So
he called me to be a pastor, but I've been doing a lot of preaching too. So don't get me too wrapped up.
So what inspired you to pursue journalism, especially in the context of abolition while serving a life sentence?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it took me 16 years to become an abolitionist. And I was so set, okay, this is the system. This is the way, this is how it goes. I'm the worst of the worst. Even understanding God's redemption for me, it's like the system is designed in such a way that it's really believable. You have hundreds of people in uniforms with badges who are, they can tell you what to do. They can throw you in the hole. And I've done over 2 years in solitary confinement, having never had an infraction. So for anything, boom, you're in the hole, right?
Right.
Privilege is gone. And so you start realizing, wow, like I was banished here, society banished me here. A judge who was very respected said, Mr. Olston, you're morally corrupt. You're irretrievably broken. There's no hope for you. The longer you're in prison, the safer society will be. And so I just kind of looked, I thought, okay, I didn't care about my country. I didn't care about my community, when I was a drug addict, a teenage drug addict. But then, early into my incarceration through sobriety and my brain was still developing and then growing in Christ, I started desiring things that I had never desired before. I thought, wow, it would be cool to have a family, to have a wife, to have a piece of land, a house, a garden, an animal, a ministry. These things would be all beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I started asking God, like, what do you have for me? I know now what you've called me to do, my creative purpose, but am I just supposed to be a pastor in prison? Am I a prison pastor? Or do you have something more for me? And although the promises and visions sometimes are vague or it's only kind of a snippet, I believe that he's promised me more than incarceration. And so now we have kind of a paradox here, right?
Right.
So I'm sentenced to life. God is saying other things. So if the system sentenced me to life, and if God who's going to deliver me, like what's up with this system, right? And you start looking around and you see guys who have been down 20, 30 years, and you're like, man, like, you're an amazing human being. Like, clearly you weren't when you came to prison, but you're an amazing human being now. Why are you still locked up? Well, I'm time barred. They won't let me out. I've exhausted all my remedies. I'm basically going to die in prison. And you see these stories, and then you become the story, right? Mm-hmm. I'm the story now. And it's all around you. And then you start seeing people also maybe who have like a 6-month or 12-month or 18-month sentence, and they're really not ready for the streets, right?
Right.
There's no process that determines whether they're ready or not. Oh, your time's up. We don't really have a legitimate parole system here, right? So there's really no review. And so these guys are like really unfit for society. Meanwhile, you got guys who've been down 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and they should have been out 20 years ago, making a difference in society and are more than capable. So I'm wrestling with this. And while I'm wrestling with these thoughts, these ideas, not really understanding where to go next, God places a man in my life, and his name is Christopher Blackwell. And he on Thursday got a 3-2 decision in his favor at the clemency board. He more than likely will get the governor's signature. He's been over 20 years. And it's interesting who God will use, too. So Christopher Blackwell is not a believer. He's not filled with the Holy Spirit. He doesn't call on the name above all names. But God still uses him. Mm-hmm. And we're praying. We're praying for this man's salvation, right? And in the meantime, what do? We just love him to Christ, right?
Right.
So we're loving Christ to Christ. As God is using him. How? Well, he's published, man, in every paper, the New York Times. He's interviewed with NPR. I mean, this guy is like probably one of the top 3 prison journalists in the country. Christopher Blackwell. He's an amazing human being, and we're just believing in his salvation. So he met me, and he was referred to me by a guy who said, man, Aaron's a good dude, right? And he met me, and literally the same day was like, do you want to be in my writing group? And I was like, yeah. I want to be published, right? I mean, I've done some journaling. Right? And he's like, nah, man, we're going to do some special things, right? And we were just chopping it up, and he was kind of getting into my brain and seeing what my views were. And he was like, have you ever heard of abolition or this and that? And I was like, oh, those people are crazy, right? And he was like, no. He was like, no, abolition. And he starts breaking down what I've been feeling. And he was like, it's kind of a broad umbrella. You can be a reform minister. You can just believe that the system is unjust, just want it better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, well, I guess I'm an abolitionist then. so as my views have kind of formed within the abolition movement, Chris wrapped around, kind of like a wraparound resources. And these resources are just tremendous human beings, right?
Right.
Debbie Zalesny, she's a CUNY law professor. He put Jill Riley, she's an amazing human being, my researcher. She works for a sitting U.S. senator. Empowerment Avenue, that's Rasan New York Thomas. I'm sure you know who Rasan is. Many people have heard of Rasan. Emily Nonco. And so Empowerment Avenue, that's who I work with directly. And they open up doors for me. And I just, next thing you know, I've written several dozen articles. Everything from, adolescent brain development as it relates to youthfulness, to solitary confinement, immigration policy, criminal statutes, restorative justice, recidivism reduction, my personal life experience. And I'm finding myself in these, writing for these publications and in these spaces, working with people who they don't care about my criminal history. They want to know right now what I contribute to the community. What do you contribute right now? Who are you? And man, these people have been so accepting of who I am, and that all began with God putting Christopher Blackwell in my life.
And he always places the right people at the right time. So let's talk about that. Have you noticed a tangible impact from your writing and advocacy work on the prison system or public perception?
Yeah, so on the prison system, that's a tough one because most of the effects that we see on the prison system is in their form of retaliation coming back at us.
Oh, yeah.
That's just very sad. What happens in the darkness, they don't want brought to the light.
Oh,
right?
no.
People know that these are modern plantations in rural areas, hidden behind a roadside tree line, right? And when that tree line clears, you see endless razor wire and guard towers and walls that meet you. And when you enter, the smells, the sight, the sound, you realize, wow, this is disturbing. And then you say, oh, what do you get paid? Oh, nothing, or 10 cents or 42 cents. And you think, well, so you're forced to work for a slave wage. And then if you hiccup or look the wrong way on this plantation, those in charge, infract you. The process is some evidence, right? So it's an accusation leveled against a lot of these guys. And guess what? If they do have a board hearing or are trying to get resentenced, that's a stain that doesn't come without consequences. So you're forced onto this plantation, and many times the plantation masters keep you on this plantation, and they do not want you to be extraordinary. So my impact really has been in community engagement. I get so much feedback on social media and then people reaching out after reading one of my publications. And it's just, I think over the course of 2.5, 3 years now that I've been doing this in this space, I think I can count the haters on one hand. I really can. It's wild that, people say, oh, the world's evil or the world's horrible. The world has its share of problems. But people, by and large, in our community are looking for redemption stories. They believe in second chances. That's human nature, right? And we have a system in place that's contrary to that. So there's been little changes and effects here within the prison system, but that's really mainly from our influence on the community and them turning and then advocating for us. And thankfully, there's been some people in very high places that God has used to apply pressure to those that run the system. Hey, change this or bring back this class, right? Or why'd you crush this organization?
So that's more of the public perception.
In prison.
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah. And I think that with the public, I think that's the thing, is really changing the public perception, because it's hard, as they say, it's hard for a dog to learn new tricks, which is the prison system. So of course it's hard for them to learn something new, because they have always been, trained and brainwashed that we have to treat people, like they're not human because they've supposedly committed this crime and they're, the low of the low, the worst of the worst. So it takes the public's perception and the public's pressure on, higher ups and legislators to move that change, because, us expecting for the prison to be like, oh yeah, what we do is wrong. we're going to be waiting for the rest of our lives for them to understand that. So that's why, I have the podcast to move public perception, because we are the ones that can make the change and make the move in the direction that they should. Like in Norway. Like Norway is a prime example of how every prison should be ran across the board, period. Because we're still human at the end of the day. Everybody makes mistakes, even the ones that are in, the ones that are watching y'all, the ones that put y'all there make mistakes all the time. There's a lot of prosecutorial misconduct that goes on that's always, hid, and you know what I mean? So they're no better than anybody. Nobody's better than anybody. We all make mistakes. And so for us to just keep canceling people and throwing them away because they committed a crime, you have some that never committed a crime. And even the ones that have, you're not looking at the full picture of, okay, well, why did they commit this crime? Like, what was their environment like? What was their childhood like? You know what I mean? So we have this cancel culture over here, which is just beyond me, of, how we can cancel our own people, warehouse our own people, and treat them the worst of the worst, and then just put them back on the street when they do get a chance to get back on the street, and wonder why they recidivize, because you've treated them like they wasn't human for so long. And so you that's who you become, that's who you think you are, because that's what you've been treated like for so long. And it's hard to really bounce back from that unless you have God on your side, unless you have the willpower to bounce yourself back from that kind of treatment for so long.
That's right. That's right. You make excellent points, Ciara. And, first of all, thanks for your bravery for hosting a podcast, like you do, and for continuing to put this in the public light. It's not easy. It's not without reprisal. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the system, who's it filled with, right? By and large, it's filled with poor and minority human beings, mostly from our inner cities, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the reality. Yeah, there's people from rural areas, who grew up in poverty too, and there's people maybe who had the silver spoon and they hiccuped or whatever. But by and large, you didn't have good representation. You're poor or minority. That's the majority of our prison system. Mm-hmm. And so most of us, we grew up in a hood or a ghetto, or in some cases a slum, and you've gone from one slum, a 6 square block radius, which is your hood, to another slum, a 6 square block radius, which is a compound, right?
Right.
And you had no investment in your life, and guess what? You still don't.
Yeah.
So I love that you said Norway, right? So Norway had the same problem we had in the 90s. They had a 70 to 80% recidivism rate. And then they went to a compassionate approach. Now, they don't have 50 different state systems like we do, and 3,000 county systems like we do, plus the federal system. They have one system, so it was much easier to make the change to a compassionate approach and investing into people. And where, they're working through about 16 different custody levels, right?
Right.
So it's constantly incentive, right? A constant incentive-based process, to where you're getting cutlery in your cell, and you got work programs, and they're preparing you from day one for release, instead of the U.S. prison system, which is a meat warehouse, right? A prison profiteering place. Finally, at the very end of your sentence, after all of the bad habits have been engraved, all of the trauma has been incurred, right? All of the abuse and oppression, and they say, "Oh, here's a program, real quick. You're good, right? Okay, now go do well, right?"
Right.
And so we know that in spite of it, God is able. However, right, being one of the countries in the forefront, who should have a much better justice system. So we all agree on that.
Definitely. So we're going to switch to Tracy. We want to kind of get Tracy's opinion on some of these things, and what it's like to, deal with incarceration while your husband's incarcerated, because that's tough. I deal with that. So it's good to have other perspectives. So Tracy, can you tell us, how has your faith in God supported you through your husband's incarceration?
Absolutely. Well, first, Ciara, I just want to say thank you for having us on your show today. We're just really happy to be here with you.
Thank you, guys.
I just know that if I didn't have God in my life, that there would be no way at all that we'll be able to get through this at all. So it's just my faith in God to be able to get through this. And I feel like with God. And it's very important to have a strong support network. And for me, that has been, people in my church groups and, Bible study groups, singing in the choir, and just ultimately trying to stay busy despite the challenges of being separated every day. And, we have the struggle of sometimes communication barriers. For those that don't know what Securus is, it's a prison email and phone system, which oftentimes, more often than not, makes communication
very
more
hard,
frustrating than it should be. But, in spite of that, I do believe that we still talk a lot, probably more than the average couple, we make time for each other. We stay connected through phone calls, email, letters, visits, and nowadays most couples don't really even talk. They'll just maybe throughout the day send a few texts to one another. And that's, for them, that's their communication, and that's good. But, in spite of us being separated almost daily, we do try to communicate, as often as possible, even though we have obviously these barriers in front of us, visit restrictions and, a lot of uncertainty and everything like that. But if I didn't have God, absolutely, there would just be no way we would be able to get through this at all.
Yeah, that's something we go through. And despite because we have GTL, which is just as bad, and the internet always goes in and out. A lot of times they don't have enough tablets for them, so they have to share tablets. And let's not even talk about the cost that we have to bear just to keep in communication with our loved ones. Like me and my husband are
1 minute left.
Are like you and Aaron. Aaron, we'll be waiting on you to call back. But we're just like that. We talk a lot, like a lot during the day, a lot at night. We send messages. Right now, we don't have visits. We were suspended from visits for retaliation for the podcast. So we are, currently working on getting my visitation back. But through that all, and then we got married during COVID as well. So I understand, how hard it is and then we didn't have a prison wedding because we got married during COVID. So we had to go around the loop, which was get married in Alabama. Because at that point in time, Alabama was like, hey, just we'll send you a marriage license. You fill it out, you have it notarized, send it back, and then we'll send you a marriage license. So that's how we got married during the middle of COVID. But it's been a struggle. I mean, for the first, almost year and a half, we couldn't see each other because there was no visitation.
Thank you for using Securus.
As soon as I got approved, visitation was suspended for COVID, of course. So it's been an up and down battle, but it takes strength and it takes the both of y'all to be able to build a marriage during incarceration, because a lot of people can't do that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Oh, and one thing I've realized is just like the inner strength that you've never realized, and the resilience that you didn't know that you even had. When starting this journey.
Yeah. And then you have to have God at the head of that marriage, because it's so hard to build a marriage without building upon God's foundation, period. And that's just my opinion. You know what I mean? That's how I felt like we've been able to build it. You know what I mean? Because there's so much temptation out here. A lot of people just can't handle the fact that they can't be with their loved one every day. They can't go on vacations. Look,
there he is.
There he is.
That's right.
No phone calls are allowed.
An incarcerated individual at Washington Correction Center. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number.
To accept this free call.
This is the real deal, y'all. This is what we go through.
Yeah.
That's right. This is what we go through.
This is what we go through. At least y'all get 20 minutes. So we get 15 minutes. So imagine how much money we spend a day.
Yeah. And how much per call? What do you guys spend? Like $3 per call?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's how it was under GTL. Yeah, when these rates went to like $1, what is it, like $1.17, $1.19 a minute, something like that.
Yeah.
No, per call. Sorry, I mean, it used to be way back. So Yeah, we went, county was like $5 and something, and then kind of then over the years there was kind of the spike highs and lows, and then finally into this system. I mean, it's just a terrible system, but you just try to be thankful where you can, right? It's like, man, phone calls should be free, but thankfully for us here in Washington, they're $1 and some change, right? So, that's that conundrum, right? Being thankful for what you have and still knowing that you're under a weight of injustice, right?
Yep. See, we have to spend 25 cents per minute, per message to send messages through GTL. We don't have stamps, which would be a lot easier.
I don't know what ours is per stamp. What is it? It's like 60 stamps for like $11.50 or almost $12.
Yeah, 60 stamps. I mean, it's still cheaper than the average postage stamp, but still.
Yeah, it's
like Gmail don't cost nothing to send email.
No,
right?
it doesn't.
So,
No.
You pay paying for the person to screen or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right,
it's
back
crazy.
to y'all.
All right.
So y'all were talking
All right, Tracy. So tell us, how do you handle public perception and potential stigma associated with your husband being incarcerated?
I just own it. A lot of people, I'm pretty private until I get to know somebody, and then I'll tell them our story. But a lot of times, first time their reaction is like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and I'm like, "Well, there's nothing to be sorry for."
Right.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I'm sorry too. But he will be home one day, and I believe that wholeheartedly, just, we don't know when, but I just own it. And I just said, well, this is my life. And you just go on about your daily life. And but 9 times out of 10, I've come to realize that people are more accepting than you realize.
Yeah, they are. And when people say they're sorry, I'm like, are you sorry that I have to deal with this crazy system, or are you sorry that my husband's incarcerated? Like, which one is it? I mean,
because he's an amazing human being. Let me tell you that.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
So we ain't sorry we're together.
Right. And a lot of them be like, well, why didn't you just wait till he come home to get married? I'm like, why wait? Like, what are we waiting on?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You still can build love during separation. Like, intimacy, there's difference in intimacy. Like, you have your sexual intimacy, but then you also have your mental intimacy, which to me tops everything. Like, if you are intimate with your partner and you're separated and you're on that mental intimacy, like, that's probably the best that you could ever have, because you're building off of, a bond. You're building off of intellect and not sexual, because that's what a lot of people think intimacy is it sexual. That's just an added part, but real intimacy is spiritually, mentally, emotionally, you know what I'm saying? And so I give us a lot more credit. Go ahead.
For sure. I mean, I want to say that I feel like our separation, it deepens our bond, between us. And we learn to work together and maintain our marriage despite the challenges.
Yes. And to maintain it.
Tell me if you guys like hold this to be true, but in this dynamic, like, all of us have lived lives, right? And I lived a life prior to incarceration, but there's never been, I can't fathom even a more powerful connection or relationship than I have with my wife. And I think some of that was built upon our circumstances, having that separation, connecting with, mental and emotional intimacy. Yeah, there's the sexual, and we all try to navigate, those intricacies with our limitations here. But man, the connection is just so powerful. And then seeing you can't help but see other married couples, right? You see successes and failures. And in a lot of marriages, you see just kind of like this existence, right? Like you guys, do you guys even really know each other, or do you still know each other? And they'll go days without even really talking or engaging with each other. And then here in prison, it's interesting because you get to see married couples who work here, right?
Right.
And then all of the other baggage that goes with that and the weird stuff of being, I mean, you can just imagine, but you're thinking like, wow, if you guys, I believe, again, one of the things I'm very thankful for is part of our suffering and our struggle has created a benefit in our connection, in our relationship building. And that's something that just can't be replaced or found anywhere else. And that's our foundation. So the day that I am free and the day that your husband is free, we have a foundation that is
unbreakable,
not easily found or built.
And it's unbreakable, because if you're able to make it through incarceration with the marriage, then you can't tell me there's nothing that you can't make it through together, because that's probably one of the hardest things, in my opinion, that you will ever go through, is having to deal with the life of incarceration, everything that comes with it, you know what I mean? And the challenges and the barriers that you have to go through just that maintain a relationship. And so to me, if you can make it through that, you can make it through anything.
Absolutely.
And like you said, you have people out here who, they get mad about financials and they let the minuscule things break them up. You know what I mean? And they're out here together every day. And then us, we're not with our loved one every day, but we're able to maneuver and work out the kinks and the bumps that we have to go through in order to maintain our marriage. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about communication, right? And, if you don't know how to communicate, when you engage in a relationship of incarceration, some form or fashion, you quickly learn how to communicate. So sometimes I think of it like a blind person, right? So someone who has lost their sight or lost some ability, their other senses are heightened, right? So we've just, it's just, I don't know, I just give glory to God. He gives many of us in these situations the ability, he heightens our ability to communicate and to work through the nuances and the challenges of life. And to be able to do that without looking at each other face to face, without holding each other, which is a huge need for human beings, but to be able to communicate and articulate our message, our point, our heart, our desires, our, whatever we're disgruntled about, right? And then to love each other, to be intimate over the phone. So that's special.
That is very special, very special. So Tracy, tell me, what are some of the biggest challenges you face in day-to-day life, like in daily life? I mean, having to be a wife, and then you having to take care of a whole household, and then, support your husband in prison. Like what is the biggest challenge that you feel for you daily?
I would say, just being separated. That is the absolute hardest part. And then just navigating the system, of having the visit restrictions. And, I would also say the emotional highs and lows, that is associated with prison life, long distance, the driving, but I would do it in a heartbeat, but learning how to find strength, again, like we were talking about earlier, and just trying to navigate all these challenges together. But I feel like I have developed and starting to hone, more coping skills to be able to manage the stress and just the emotional drain of not having him home daily. So both of us have really, really just this last year, we've been really focusing on our health and our fitness, and just, we try to stay as busy as we possibly can and not focus on the negative, of our situation. And we just try to make the best of it. And I try to find comfort and solidarity with other, quote unquote prison wives. I hate that term. I'm just a wife, I'm a regular wife. I'm not a prison wife, but I'm a wife. But just whatever whatever we can possibly do to just make this situation more tolerable and more bearable. My strength is, my faith is very important to me. And so I just find solace and strength in God and just try to grow during this time. And it's a time of, I would say, just personal growth. And we just try to make it a time of having a deeper understanding of our priorities and our goals. So both of us, we just try to stay focused and thinking more about the long-term goals, like our future, and just planning for our future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely what we try to do. Because, I mean, if you focus on the emotional roller coaster that comes with this thing that we have to deal with, it could take you up out of here, like literally. And that's what we do is, focus on, like, we work out, like we find things to do together, even though we're separated. We find things to do together, like working out, and, we have 2 businesses, and then we have the podcast. So we work on that together and throw ideas back and forth. We exercise, we try to eat if we can together, watch. So try to find things that we could do together. And then also just leaning into God, because, sometimes that's all you could do is just call his name and be like, Lord, I need you, like right now. This is hard, because we're human. So we go through those emotions of wanting our spouse here, especially if your day's not going right. And you're just like, oh, if you were home, this would be so much better. And then you're faced with reality, like he's not home. So, I have to man up and do this and keep doing it till he gets home, and also be their strength as well, because they can't always be strong. You know what I mean? Especially the things that they go through and they see on a daily basis. It's hard for them to always be strong. And so sometimes we have to be strong when they can't. And so it takes a lot to get through this thing. I don't think a lot of people realize that. But when you love somebody, you'll do what you can. You know what I mean? How do you guys feel about that?
On that too, real quick. Yeah. So it's interesting. So from my wife's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't always articulate all the nuances of every day, but I know she loves me for a myriad of reasons. But when they're mistreating me here with medical, right, and my wife has to call and deal with 6 different transfers and people hanging up on her and not returning her calls just to get me on a different diet, or to get me seen if I have gut inflammation, or I have, why do I have headaches all of a sudden, or why is my skin peeling all of a sudden, right?
Right.
They have this reclaimed water that they've gone to, or they put it behind glass, right? Or for you guys, messing with you because of your podcast. I dealt with that a couple years ago with my podcast. And so what takes DOC, the Department of Corrections, a split second, a signature, a decision, many times takes our loved ones, the wives of their husbands in prison. It takes our wives hours, weeks, months, right? Sometimes years to undo an unjust decision that takes literally the stroke of a pen or a quick decision by an administrator. And so that's love, right? That's long suffering. That's bearing that's coming alongside of your spouse who's incarcerated and dealing with the never ending bureaucracy of the system that just, it seeks to crush you. It seeks to weigh you down. Virtually every interaction with the staff, and they treat you like the criminal, right? First of all, I committed crimes, but I'm not a criminal, right? But they still treat me like a criminal. They're frisking me, dehumanizing strip searches. I get secondary spray, if they're spraying the guy, with very harsh chemicals. And so it's interesting. Our very first contact visit, my wife and I, very first contact visit ever, they deployed OC spray in the visiting room on a guy who they said exhibited pre-attack indicators. Like, what is that? These Orwellian terms. The guy wasn't flipping out, right? He was a little rambunctious. There was nothing that you couldn't de-escalate, right?
Right.
And so they're hosing him down, and then this spray goes everywhere. And I look at my wife, right? We're not engaged or anything at the time. We're feeling each other. Okay, we can see where this can go. And I look at her. We're wearing masks. It's during COVID, which lasted forever in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I look at her and I said, "Are you up for this?" We're crying. You know, we all got secondary spray. Our noses are running off our face. Everything is burning on fire, right?
Right.
We experience that all the time in prison. But loved ones, we shouldn't have to, and especially loved ones shouldn't have to. So I'm looking at her. Our faces are literally running down, right?
Right.
Snot bubbles, you know, everything. I look at her and we pull down our mask. I said, "Are you up for this?" And just, you know, I'm not here to glorify Bonnie and Clyde or anything like that. But she looked at me and she said, "I'm your ride or die chick."
Yeah.
I'm your ride or die chick. She knew already what she was signing up for. A civilian who has a bachelor degree in business, an emphasis in entrepreneurship. She can do whatever she wants. She works for the state, right? She works for the state right now. And just a beautiful human being, highly intelligent. She could do whatever she wants. She could be with whoever she wants. And she looked at me, a man with a life sentence in prison. We just got sprayed, right? Everyone in that room got sprayed.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "I'm your ride or die chick." And that sums it all up. You know,
yeah.
in prison, a wife who's with someone incarcerated, they have to give everything, including their dignity in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And no human being should have to give up their dignity. But these processes try and seek to dehumanize even you as free citizens, as taxpayers, right? And their salary, they seek to dehumanize and demoralize and to crush you and to remove all hope. And you guys, you women have to give everything for us in this process. And that is not understated.
It's not, but God says love bear all things and is patient, is kind, and is long suffering. And that's what I believe. And that's what I know. You know what I mean? I know at the end of the day, he will reward us for being our helper, because that's what he put us here for. We're our husband's helper. And so we are here to help y'all through this unjust and to help y'all grow through this as well, because we all need somebody to help us grow, especially through a situation like this. And so that's what I told my husband, like, I'm here. You know, a lot of times I know sometimes he, you know, hears from other guys when their girls cheated on them and things of that nature. And sometimes that lingers in the back of his mind. He's like, I got all this time. And, you know, and I'm like, I'm here. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. Time is time, you know, and we're on God's time. We're not on the DOC's time or whatever time says them when you look you up. That's not what time we're on. God has the last word, the last say so at the end of the day. And so, you know, I'm here doing what he wants. What he wants me to do, and this is what he told me to do, and so this is what I'm doing, and this is what we're gonna do till he says it's time until our time is up. You know what I mean? So yeah.
All
Yeah.
Amen.
All right.
Well, Aaron, we'll be waiting on you to call back. This will probably be the last one, but it's been such a joy to talk to you guys and get a perspective from another married couple, you know, and just like-minded people. Yeah, like-minded people.
It's a joy. It's an honor. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
While he's calling back, Tracy, can you tell us
The caller has hung up.
what changes or reforms that you hope to see in the criminal justice system based off your experiences?
Well, we live in Washington, you know, and it's supposed to be one of the most progressive states, but I feel like not only in Washington, but in all of the states, the things need to change because it's just archaic laws and there needs to be reform everywhere. And just really hoping that somebody's eyes will become wide open to realize that, you know, people are being sentenced to exceptionally long sentences. You know, in Washington, I don't know about North Carolina, but we don't have parole here.
We don't either. Parole was gone in 94.
Aaron.
That's awful.
An
Yeah.
incarcerated individual at Washington Correction Center. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number.
To accept this free call, press 1. Thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
You're back.
Hey. All right, I'm back. Yeah.
But yeah, as we were saying that she was saying that there's no parole in North Carolina either.
Mm-mm. And we have a lot of lifers or death row, and then we have mandatory minimums also.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
It just plagues our country.
Yeah.
You know, some states, there's some states that are starting to do it right, and yeah, it's. I was in a conversation with someone the other day about our system of government and our 50 states with their level of sovereignty and our federal system and how that all kind of works together or doesn't work together. And, the checks and balances and the framing of our Constitution that came into play in 1776 and then, the Bill of Rights in the 1791, somewhere around there. This experiment, there's this idea that this is the greatest thing on earth. And just to push back against that a little bit, it would certainly appear to be a greater system, at least at that time. But since then, many countries and governments have established constitutions that have built upon ours. And so while we have some archaic checks and balances, it appears that our system is structured in such a way where the gears of justice sure do move slowly in this country, and maybe more slowly than they ought to. I'm all for a more perfect union, and I think today we're in need of a more perfect union still. So
we are.
Certainly.
Right.
Tracy, you want to finish? I know you were saying I asked you what you think should change.
Well, he basically just summed it up, and to touch on that a little bit more. Restorative justice. Defer. Yes. This, I believe in the power of redemption and this rehabilitation with our justice system. And I just believe that, change is real. But we know that it's going to be very, very slow. But, my hopes is that all states eventually will just move towards the Norway model. That is just the more just way to do things. And I'm hoping that the change will be swift instead of this slow progression that, unfortunately is what we're seeing. But in the justice system, we know that the wheels
turn
very,
very
slowly,
slow.
but very slow, very slow.
They do.
I'm hoping that something will change rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, me too. And to me, the right thing to do is, of course, bring the Norway model in, but restorative justice is so important because you're healing both sides. And I believe that if you have healing of both sides of the person that committed the crime and then the person that lost their loved one to a crime or the one that, was a victim of a crime, it'll be more understanding because you're healing them. Because, we're just set on a justice system where, we'll give them this god awful time and this will fix, this will be your justice, when you hear them all the time saying, well, I don't feel like I got justice. Even though this person got life or they got the death penalty, I don't feel like I got justice. My loved one's not here. I can never bring them back. And so you're not healing them. And a lot of people don't even know where to begin to heal. So if you have restorative justice, right.
Yeah, those harmed the most, right? The victims and the perpetrator who comes from trauma, those at the center of it, right? They there's no investment, right? The victim wasn't a priority.
Right. And so that's why they're like, give them this insane amount of time, and why they're still hurting and why they feel like this person is the low of the low. So if we're healing both sides and you are bringing the person that committed the crime and then the one that was the victim or the crime or the family and have them really sit down and hash that trauma together, I mean, just the whole community could be 10 times more better because you're healing each side. You're having the person understand and own up to what they did and then understand why they did it. And then you're having the one that experienced the crime to kind of understand why this happened and then actually heal from it because you're confronting it head on. You're not just, pushing it under a rug every day. Like, let me get up and keep going. But you're actually starting to heal that trauma because you're confronting it face on, head on, instead of just continually trying to figure out a way to avoid it. And so I think that's where we have went wrong for so many years. We're not helping them heal.
100%. Yeah, sadly, restorative justice is an aberration of the system, right? It like surfaces here and there in like the program, or kind of like as an attachment or an extra maybe somewhere, and it really should be the core. Moving towards a transformative justice model. Having that restorative justice as a core principle in our justice system. Huge believer in it. I swear by it. It changed my life. I've been a part of groups where I've been able to affect change in the lives of those who have been victimized, those who are survivors, those who have family, who've had family members that lost their lives, and just the whole gambit. And it's something I absolutely swear by, having been part of it.
Yeah, it works wonders for people. I don't know why that hasn't always been, the head of the forefront, because Indian tribe nations have been doing restorative justice for years upon years. That's how they heal.
And African.
Mm-hmm.
It's popular in Africa too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
But hopefully, eventually, we will catch on to a better way of treating all of our people, because we're all human. And so, hopefully we all can keep advocating and keep pushing the system to move towards a more of a humanity and understanding that you're causing more and more trauma. Prison is causing more and more trauma. You're causing people to recidivize because so many people get so institutionalized that they can't even handle being in society anymore because they've been institutionalized for so long. And that, we're all still human and not slaves. So the 13th Amendment needs to be abolished all the way, period. Because nobody should be treated like a slave, even if they commit a crime. It's about forgiving.
It did not. That's right. That's right. It enshrined slavery. That's right. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you're hip to that. And these compounds, these modern plantations, do not reflect society at all. I always call this place like Mars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going back to a different planet when you get out. And not only the treatment here, but also the conditions and how it's set up. And you speak on institutionalization, but the dynamics and the structure of these modern plantations it not only reinforces trauma, but also contributes at a higher rate to recidivism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what they want, is because they want to keep us enslaved, because look how they make billions of dollars off of people in free labor. So that's why it's important to let the community know that this is what's happening. Like, they're just using these people for free labor and not to actually try to rehabilitate or help them overcome the things that have gotten them there,
Yeah. These unique.
That's the thing. The average person doesn't realize what's happening.
They don't, because they brainwash us to think, oh, well, this person committed a crime, so they got to go do the time.
Over here in the Northwest, serial killers are nothing new, right?
Mm-hmm.
But over here in the Northwest, every form of every type of reform that's submitted in legislation, any bill that comes across that would lead to the more just system, those who have a financial interest in mass incarceration begin to pump out commercials,
mm-hmm.
Get into the media and say, this is going to release the worst of the worst, right? And they always
mm-hmm.
equate it to, whoever the worst, Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer or whoever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, look, really, he's never going to get out, right? And people who were in opposition to the Norway model around the world, again, it was put into the compassionate approach was put into effect in the 90s before the Anders Breivik situation. And he's the guy who went on to the island and killed like 70-something youth. And so people point to that and say, well, he only got, 25 years or 26 years. Well, what they also are failing to mention is that Norway has a review process. And so if you don't qualify for release, a psychological test, what you've done to prepare for reentry, they then have 5-year reviews after that. So they don't have to let you out. There's this idea that, oh, no, you can just go on a killing spree and then you're going to get out in 20 or 25 years. No, that's not how it works. There's a review process which the U.S. in many states does not have, right?
Right.
So when you sentence an 18-year-old or however old you are, right, still a developing brain through a life sentence, and you don't have a review process in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, that's an injustice, because that's a different human being. That's a mature adult now, right? So
Right.
for the normal model, I cannot rave more about it. It's a beautiful model. I've investigated inside and out. We absolutely need that or something very similar to that here.
Mm-hmm.
And then people who, kick against a compassionate model, which, by the way, they went from a 70+% recidivism rate in the 90s. Many people don't know that, to today a below 20% recidivism rate.
Sure did.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is still struggling, hovering around an 80% national recidivism rate, which is an indictment of our system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So any system you give tens, or in our case, hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars to, and it says it replies with an 80% failure rate, that system is derelict. That's an indictment of the system.
Yes.
And that's what we have.
That is true. That is true. Well, you guys, we've been on for an hour. I appreciate it. It's been so insightful. You guys are amazing. Yeah. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep following God's plans and his path, because he's got y'all on the right path, and keep bringing people to him. But yeah, I appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Guys, any last words?
I appreciate it. We do have some last words. Your audience can follow Tracy and I on X, the Abolition Christian, at Aaron Olston 1986. You can also check out my Facebook and LinkedIn, Aaron Edward Olston, all of our podcasts, patreon.com/the Abolition Christian. And Tracy and I, our motto really is, while there's breath in your body, there's hope for your life. Nice. And we believe that all people listening to this are moved with compassion, just be encouraged that you can make a difference. Even as one person, no matter where you're at, you can make a difference in the lives of others. You never know what someone is struggling with, whether you come across someone who's unhoused in society, struggling with addiction or suicidal thoughts. A word in due season, right? That perfect word, and you have no idea. I just encourage you to open up your mouth and just speak. Let God use you to speak into the lives of those who need a positive word and a word of encouragement. Also, be encouraged to reach out to people in prison. Our brothers and sisters, over 2 million of them, are suffering under this current injustice and oppression all around the nation. We're 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. And our men and women and children that are incarcerated, and many of which come from trauma, need people to invest into their lives and to show them love, and that their life has hope and redemption and value. And thanks for having us on. God bless you.
God bless you guys. Take care. And I'm here anytime you need me. You want to get on again, just reach out. But yeah, thank you guys so much. And I hope I have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.
Vice versa. Anytime. We'll be ready.
Of course. God bless you. Take care.
God
Bye.
bless you. You too.